Welcome. This audio overview summarizes the main ideas from the Kingdom Theology Compendium for Session 3. The excerpts feature material from the works of N.T. Wright and Timothy Keller. This content was generated by artificial intelligence, so it may contain errors. Please listen carefully and critically evaluate everything you hear.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to give you that essential shortcut, helping you get knowledgeable fast. Today, we're really diving deep, tackling maybe the most critical claim in, well, all of Christian history and thought. We're talking about the historical bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. That single event. It's the bedrock, isn't it? It's the non-negotiable foundation for everything that follows in Christian belief. You know, theology, hope, even the ultimate promise of cosmic renewal, it all hinges on this. So our task today is to really dig into and synthesize the thinking of two major modern voices on this N.T. Wright and Timothy Keller. We want to grasp the core logic and, just as importantly, the profound impact of this claim.
Yeah, we're not just summarizing points here. The goal is a more holistic view, right? We'll move through it systematically. First, we'll get into the nitty-gritty, the academic exegesis, looking closely at Paul's key text in 1 Corinthians 15.
Meticulously, yes.
Then we'll zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture, how this idea critiques other worldviews that, frankly, don't quite stack against reality.
Right. Alternative explanations.
And finally, we land on the practical stuff.
Yeah.
What does this historical certainty mean for us now? What's the present-day power?
Exactly. We're trying to connect the dots, basically. Unifying the history, the hope it generates, and how that plays out in daily life. So for you, the learner listening in, this deep dive is really about showing how this one absolutely unique event underpins the entire Christian project. Shall we start with that blueprint Paul lays out, that foundational argument?
Let's do it. Section 1, the exegetical blueprint. Okay, so N.T. Wright looks at 1 Corinthians 15, and he sees something far more deliberate than just, Paul riffing in a letter. He calls it a carefully composed whole, like theological architecture.
That's a great way to put it, architecture. It's not accidental. Wright really emphasizes that you have to see the structure to get the argument. Paul is being incredibly methodical here.
And this structure, Wright argues, is key to understanding Paul's whole point about continuity between our life now and the future life.
Precisely. Continuity, but also transformation. Wright shows this chapter is almost, mathematically laid out. It stops us seeing it as just stream of consciousness thinking. You've got these balancing sections across all 58 verses. Like an intro and conclusion, he labels A and A.
Right, A and A.
And then the main arguments in the middle labeled B and B, and each of those is even broken down further into two parts.
Okay, so A is the intro, verses 111. That's the history bit, the witnesses.
That's it. The raw data, the testimony.
And the conclusion, A, verse 58, is the so what? The call to action, be steadfast.
Exactly, the ethical implication.
But the real meat of the argument, you're saying, is in that middle section, B1, B2, B1, and B2. Can you unpack those a bit? What's Paul actually doing in each part?
Yeah, this is where the depth really is and why the deep dive is worth it. Paul is building a logical case step by step for the future resurrection of believers, but it's all anchored in the past resurrection of Christ. So B1, that's verses 12, 19. That's the direct challenge. Paul basically says, look, if Christ wasn't raised, then everything we believe is pointless. It's logically impossible. It's kinos useless, empty. We're still stuck in our sins. He establishes right there that Jesus' resurrection is the sine qua non, the absolute necessity.
The non-negotiable starting point.
Yeah.
Got it. What about B2?
B2, verses 20, 28. This shifts focus to the cosmic scale, the definitive defeat of death itself. Here, Paul explicitly links Christ's bodily resurrection to undoing Adam's fall. It's about reversing that whole narrative of decay and death. Christ is the prototype, the first fruits. His resurrection guarantees that his people will follow. And importantly, this section introduces that temporal split, Christ first, then his followers later at his coming.
Okay, so B1 is the logical necessity. B2 is the cosmic scope and the guarantee. What about the B sections? B1.
Right. So B1, verses 29 to 50, tackles the how. The mechanics. This is where Paul addresses that crucial question. Okay, but what kind of body are we talking about? He draws that vital distinction between the current physical, perishable body, the soma psychikon, and the future spiritual, incorruptible body, the soma pneumatikon. Spiritual meaning spirit-powered, not non-physical.
Ah, okay. That's a key clarification. Soma pneumaticon, spirit-animated body, not just a ghost.
Precisely. And then finally, B2, verses 51-57. This is the grand finale, the triumphant conclusion. Paul unveils the mystery of that change at the last trumpet call, where death is utterly defeated, swallowed up in victory. It brings it all home.
Wow. Okay, seeing it laid out like that, B1 logic, B2 cosmic scope, B1 mechanics body type, B2 final victory, really shows how tightly argued it is. It's not random. And you mentioned this idea of new creation underpinning it all.
Absolutely. That's the bedrock theology here. Wright argues compellingly that Genesis 1-3, the creation and fall story, is basically the subtext for this entire chapter. Paul isn't just talking about individual souls escaping a flawed world. No, he's talking about the restoration of humanity, restoring us to bear the image of the Messiah, the true Adam, who fulfills God's original intention for humanity laid out in Genesis. It's a powerful affirmation that God's original creation project was and remains fundamentally good.
And if creation is good, then death can't be part of the original plan, right? It must be an intruder.
Exactly. You've hit on a core point of the Jewish worldview Paul operates from, specifically the Pharisaic tradition. This stands in such sharp contrast to the Greek ideas floating around Corinth at the time. For Paul, God is the good creator. Therefore, death isn't natural, it's the enemy. It's the ultimate intruder, the violator of God's good world. And if God is truly good and just, he can't just compromise with that enemy. Death has to be defeated, utterly. That's the logic behind verse 26. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. It must be destroyed for God's plan to be complete.
This seems like the perfect place to tackle that crucial distinction you mentioned earlier. The one right really hammers home bodily resurrection versus just soul survival. Because, let's be honest, for many people today, the default assumption is that Christian hope is simply the soul floating off to heaven somewhere.
And if that was Paul's point, chapter 15 would be completely redundant. Honestly, he wouldn't have needed to write it. The idea of the soul surviving death, that was common currency in the Greco-Roman world, especially influenced by Plato. It was pagan belief. If Paul just meant non-bodily survival, he could have just nodded along with the Corinthians philosophers. Yeah, sure, something like that. But he doesn't. He introduces something utterly radical, something distinctly Jewish, but now transformed through Christ. Resurrection. Anastasis.
So what does anastasis resurrection actually mean in Paul's framework, specifically?
It means that something which has actually died, namely the body, is then given a brand new transformed life by the Creator God. It's fundamentally a physical concept, even if the new physicality is different. It's not about disembodied spirits floating free. Remember, for Paul, the body isn't just a shell. It's essential to who we are, how we act in the world. So the whole point of arguing for resurrection is to show that God's redemption plan is comprehensive. It tackles death itself, the physical decay, not just the question of where our consciousness goes after we die. To deny the bodily nature of resurrection is, in Paul's mind, to undercut the entire victory over death.
And Jesus' own resurrection is Exhibit A, the proof point and the model for this new kind of existence.
Precisely. His resurrection isn't just a unique event for him. It's the first fruits, as Paul says in verse 20. It's the event that bursts the future into the present. It guarantees the future resurrection for all who are in him. But, and this is crucial, Paul modifies standard Jewish expectations based on what actually happened to Jesus.
How so? What were the standard expectations?
Well, typically in Jewish thought around that time, the resurrection was seen as a single massive event happening only at the very end of history. Everyone raised together. Paul, reflecting on Jesus, modifies this in two key ways. First, the timing.
Right, you mentioned the split.
Yes. The resurrection event is now split into two stages. The Messiah comes first, he is the first fruits, and then his followers are raised later at his return, his parousia. Second, the nature of the resurrected body.
It's not just coming back to life like Lazarus.
Exactly. It's not mere resuscitation. Lazarus came back to the same mortal life destined to die again. Jesus' resurrection is a transformation. It's a going on into a completely new kind of embodiment, incorruptible, glorious, powerful, spirit-driven. It's a fundamental shift in the very substance of being, not just hitting the reset button on the old life.
Okay, that distinction between resuscitation and resurrection as transformation is huge. But all this dense theology, this structure, it only works because Paul grounds it first in history, doesn't he? Before diving into the why and how, he lays out the what happened, what Wright calls that critical fifth witness alongside the Gospels.
Absolutely. That's the introduction, verses 1-11. It's non-negotiable. Paul doesn't start with abstract ideas. He starts with testimony, hard facts. He lists this specific, verifiable, finite group of witnesses. It's not vague. It's Cephas Peter, then the 12 as a group. Then, incredibly, this group of more than 500 believers who saw the risen Christ at one time.
And he points out most of them are still alive when he's writing. It feels almost like a challenge, doesn't it? Like he's saying, go on, check my sources, ask them yourself.
It absolutely feels like that. It's an open invitation to verification, to interrogation. It demolishes that easy dismissal that this was all just a legend that grew up over decades. And modern historical scholarship really backs this up. There's a strong consensus that the core gospel summary Paul quotes in verses 3-5, Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, he was buried, he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and he appeared. That this creed was formulated incredibly early.
How early?
We're talking within months of Jesus' death, maybe even weeks, not years, certainly not decades, months. This means the belief in the resurrection wasn't some later theological development. It was immediate. It was the explosion that created Christianity in the first place. It's the earliest bedrock. That gives us this unshakable historical anchor for everything else Paul builds upon it.
And it's precisely this historical anchor that allows both Wright and Keller to then broaden the scope.
Right.
To move from the text itself to the massive cosmic implications. And to critique worldviews that ignore or deny this anchor.
Exactly. That historical event becomes the lens through which we can evaluate everything else. So let's shift gears slightly. We need to grasp the sheer scale of the hope that this historical resurrection unleashes. Western thinking, often without realizing it, has tended to shrink this hope down, focusing too much on just the individual soul's destiny.
Which you mentioned comes partly from Greek philosophy, Plato and the idea of escaping the body.
Right, that Platonic idea achieving this sort of disembodied bliss. It's had a long hangover in Western thought, including some popular Christian ideas. But the biblical vision, the one Paul is championing, is so much bigger. It's about the renewal of the entire cosmos. Everything.
And Wright uses this massive cosmos-renewing hope grounded in the resurrection to really critique two other dominant ways of thinking, two non-biblical worldviews that are still very much alive today. The first one is aimed at this idea that humanity can basically save itself through sheer effort and progress. He calls it evolutionary optimism, or the myth of progress.
Yes, the myth of progress. This view really took root during the Enlightenment, didn't it? The 18th, 19th centuries. It's the belief that through human ingenuity, science, reason, technology, education, politics, we're on an inevitable upward march. Towards some kind of utopia. The idea is that the solution is internal to the human project. We just need to try harder, get smarter, manage things better. We become homo deus, essentially humanity saving itself.
Sounds good on paper, maybe. But Wright finds some pretty devastating flaws in it, two big ones. A moral flaw and a scientific one. Let's start with the moral problem.
The moral problem is stark. If progress is this inevitable benevolent force, how do you explain the sheer scale of radical evil we've witnessed, especially in the 20th century, which should have been the pinnacle of this progress? How does the myth of progress account for Auschwitz, the Gulag, systematic genocides? How does it explain the fact that our greatest technical leap, splitting the atom, gave us Hiroshima? If that's what progress leads to, then the concept itself seems fundamentally flawed, or at least morally ambiguous. It doesn't seem to be making us intrinsically better.
And it doesn't fix the past either, does it?
No, that's a crucial point. Even if we achieved utopia tomorrow, what about all the suffering, the injustice, the victims throughout history before utopia arrived? Does progress just write them off? Radical evil seems to demand something more than just hoping the future will be better. It seems to demand some kind of external intervention, some form of ultimate justice and redemption that progress alone can't deliver.
Okay, that's the moral critique. What about the scientific flaw? You mentioned modern cosmology kind of pulls the rug out from under this idea too.
It does, rather dramatically. The scientific problem is that, according to our best understanding of physics, particularly thermodynamics, the universe itself is not heading towards utopia. It's heading towards dissolution. The long-term forecast is pretty bleak, cosmically speaking. Either we face the big cool down, the universe expanding forever until all usable energy dissipates, leaving just cold, dark, dead matter.
Heat death.
Heat death, exactly. Or, depending on the exact calculations of mass and energy, potentially the big crunch, where gravity eventually wins, reverses the expansion, and pulls everything back into an incredibly dense, hot, chaotic singularity. Either way, not exactly utopia.
So the scientific trajectory is decay and dissolution, not endless progress. What's the implication of that for the myth of progress?
The implication is pretty profound. If the very stage on which we're trying to build our human utopia is itself guaranteed by the laws of physics to run out of steam, to decay and collapse, well, then our efforts, however noble, seem ultimately temporary and, in a cosmic sense, futile. It suggests that genuine, lasting redemption can't just bubble up from within the current system. If the system itself is winding down, you need something new. You need God, the Creator, to step in and do something fresh to put it to rights, as Wright puts it, a sovereign external act of new creation. And that, Christians argue, is precisely what the resurrection of Christ was, the beginning of that new creation breaking into the old.
Okay, so if the myth of progress is flawed because it's too optimistic about matter and human potential within the current system, the second worldview Wright critiques goes in the opposite direction. It wants to escape matter altogether. Let's talk about ontological dualism, the souls in transit model.
Yes, and this one is arguably even more insidious because it creeps into popular Christian thinking so easily. Its roots are deep, going back to ancient Greek philosophy, especially Platonism, and also finding expression in various forms of Gnosticism. These philosophies tend to see the material world, the physical body, transience, change, as somehow inferior, maybe even dark or evil, something to be escaped from.
And this translates pretty directly into that common idea we already mentioned, that the main Christian hope is just about individuals going to heaven when you die. Full stop.
Exactly. That idea fits perfectly with this dualistic mindset. It encourages what Wright calls a just passing through spirituality. If this world and this body are just temporary, disposable containers for the real you, the soul, then why invest too much in them? Why care deeply about justice in this world, about ecology, about culture, about your physical work or vocation? If the goal is just escape, then engagement with the created order becomes secondary, maybe even a distraction. And implicitly, it ends up devaluing God's own statement that his creation was very good.
But the early Christians, coming out of that Jewish background you highlighted earlier, they completely rejected this dualism, didn't they?
They did. Emphatically, the early church fathers, Paul, the gospel writers, they were not dualists. Their hope was shaped by the deep Jewish affirmation of the goodness of creation. For them, evil wasn't inherent in materiality or the fact that things change or decay. No, evil was defined as rebellious idolatry humans, turning away from the true God to worship parts of creation and the cosmic disruption that followed from that rebellion. Therefore, the goal of God's redemption isn't escape from the created order, but the rescue of the created order. It means newly embodied life within a renewed, redeemed creation.
So what's the picture? What's the ultimate vision that encapsulates this rejection of dualism and the affirmation of a redeemed creation?
The most powerful image is the one we find at the end of the Bible, in Revelation 21 and 22. It's the vision of the marriage of heaven and earth. Notice what happens. The New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven to earth. Heaven and earth are finally united, integrated. It's not about humans escaping earth to go up to heaven. It's about heaven coming down to transform in perfect earth. God doesn't scrap his original project. He brings it to its intended perfection. The decay and corruption of the old are gone, replaced by a new, incorruptible, physical reality where God dwells fully with his redeemed people. This vision is the ultimate biblical no to dualism. It affirms the final glorious destiny of both the spiritual and the physical, perfectly united.
Okay, so we have this incredible cosmic hope, this vision of new creation, all grounded, as Wright insists, in the historical resurrection. And it's this historical reality that Timothy Keller really brings into focus, especially considering what he sees as a modern crisis of hope.
That's right. Keller points out the irony, doesn't he? We live in an age of unprecedented technological power. We have social media connecting billions, air travel shrinking the globe. But these very tools seem to be creating new anxieties, new threats. Think about social media fueling polarization, or air travel enabling pandemics to spread rapidly.
We have more control over the natural world than ever yet.
Yet we seem to have less control over ourselves, over human evil. Science can give us longer lives, more comfortable lives, but it can't seem to eradicate greed, hatred, violence, or injustice. It can't give us ultimate meaning or conquer death.
Which brings us back to why the nature of Christian hope is so important. Keller really emphasizes understanding the biblical word for hope, elpida. It's not like our modern usage, is it?
Not at all. When we say, I hope so, it often means I wish, or there's a chance, it's uncertain. But the biblical word elpida means profound certainty. It's confidence rooted in something that has already happened. Because God has acted decisively in history, specifically in the death and resurrection of Jesus, his future promises are therefore guaranteed. It's not wishful thinking, it's assurance. Peter calls it a living hope, something active, dynamic, implanted in us by the Spirit, based on that past event.
So if it's based on a past event, then that event must be historical. It can't just be a nice story or a powerful metaphor.
Absolutely critical point. Keller, like Wright, insists that Christianity stands or falls on whether these things actually happened in space and time. If the resurrection is just a metaphor, like the cycle of seasons, spring following winter, then, as Paul himself argued back in 1 Corinthians 15, the faith is kinos. It's useless, empty, impotent. It has no real power to change anything. A merely symbolic resurrection offers no real victory over actual death.
It has to be real concrete. I love that line you mentioned from the poet John Updike, demanding the resurrection be acknowledged as the vast rock of materiality.
Yes. That poem, 7 Stanzas at Easter, is so powerful. Updike basically says, make no mistake. If Christ was not raised, you are patching pity onto stones. Let us not mock God with metaphor. He insists that the truth claim rests on the ridiculous, the scandalous reality of cells reversing decay, of matter being transformed. It has to be historical, material, rock solid, which means we need to be confident in the historical evidence that makes this belief reasonable, not just a blind leap of faith.
We've touched on some of this evidence already with Wright's take on 1 Corinthians 15. Let's quickly recap and perhaps add Keller's perspective. We have the timing that core creed formulated within months, killing the legend theory.
Check. Extremely early.
We have the witnesses Paul appealing to hundreds, many still alive, challenging people to check. That tackles the hoax or hallucination ideas.
Right. You can't have a mass hallucination of the same complex event involving over 500 people across different times and places, and a hoax involving that many people with nothing to gain but persecution and death is historically implausible.
But Keller, like Wright, also points to the nature of the resurrection appearances themselves, the sheer strangeness of the risen body.
Yes, the strangeness is key evidence. What the witnesses reported was unique. It wasn't just a ghost or a vision he ate fish, he could be touched. But it also wasn't just a resuscitated corpse coming back to the old life he appeared and disappeared, went through locked doors. Keller might describe it as transphysical. It was clearly physical, yet it operated beyond the normal constraints of physics.
And also, he wasn't always immediately recognized, right, by people who knew him intimately.
Correct. Mary Magdalene mistakes him for the gardener. The disciples on the road to Emmaus walk and talk with him for hours before recognizing him. This suggests a transformation so profound it altered his appearance in some way. It wasn't just Jesus back to normal. It was Jesus glorified, transformed.
And why is this combination, physical yet transphysical, familiar yet transformed, considered strong evidence for historicity?
Because it doesn't fit neatly into any pre-existing category of the time. As we discussed, Jewish thought expected either a general resurrection at the end of time or maybe angelic figures. Greco-Roman stories had ghosts or heroes becoming gods. Nobody had a category for a bodily resurrected Messiah appearing mid-history with a transformed trans-physical body. It's just weird. The fact that the disciples reported something so specific, so unique, and so counterintuitive to their own frameworks strongly suggests they weren't making it up based on existing myths or expectations. They were describing something real that shattered their categories and forced them to invent new language. It smells like genuine, bewildered historical reminiscence.
So the evidence was so unique and compelling, it caused this instant radical shift. Keller might call it a mutation in their core beliefs.
Exactly. Think about it. Devout first-century Jews suddenly believing their executed Messiah had been raised ahead of the general resurrection, and that his body had these unprecedented qualities, and that this somehow meant God's kingdom was already breaking in. These were massive, earth-shattering shifts in worldview, departing radically from standard Jewish theology. The rapid, unified adoption of these unimaginable beliefs across the diverse early Christian movement is incredibly hard to explain historically without the actual event of the resurrection acting as the catalyst. It left, as you said, a huge footprint.
Okay, so the resurrection is historically credible, even uniquely strange in a way that supports its reality. But for Keller, this isn't just about winning a historical argument. This certainty fuels present power. He talks about the resurrection as the good invasion.
Yes, the good invasion. I love that phrase. It captures the idea that the resurrection isn't just something that happened back then, it's an ongoing reality. The cross and resurrection together are the D-Day of cosmic history. They are the decisive turning point, where the power and the pattern of God's future new creation broke into our present world. And that power is now available, primarily through the Holy Spirit. The New Testament frequently describes the Spirit as the first fruits, or the down payment, arrabon, of the resurrection life. You see this in Ephesians 1:19-20. It's not just a vague feeling, it's the actual power of the age to come, present and active now.
And this power doesn't just empower us randomly. It comes with a specific operating manual, a pattern for life, the Great Reversal.
Precisely. The way from the cross to the resurrection becomes the fundamental template for Christian living. How did Christ achieve the ultimate victory? Not through seizing power, not through dominance or worldly strength, but through weakness, through service, through self-giving, through obedience even unto death. So the pattern for us, empowered by the Spirit, is the same. True transformation, genuine impact, lasting fruitfulness. These come not from grabbing power, but from letting go. Through service, humility, confession, vulnerability, forgiveness, it completely flips worldly values on their head.
It's achieving triumph through weakness.
Exactly. That's the Great Reversal.
And Keller sees Paul himself as the prime example of this, which also highlights why belief, while reasonable, ultimately needs grace.
Paul is Exhibit A of the Great Reversal powered by grace. Look at his self-assessment. He constantly reminds people, I am the least of the apostles, unfit to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church. This wasn't false modesty. He knew his past. He knew his utter inadequacy based on his own record. He was, before his conversion, the epitome of self-sufficient religious effort, trying to earn God's favor.
Yet he also says, but by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. He holds those two things together, total inadequacy and yet incredible fruitfulness.
That tension is the engine of grace. Keller emphasizes that while the evidence for the resurrection is strong, compelling even, belief isn't just an intellectual calculation. It requires God's grace to overcome our deep-seated spiritual blindness, our pride, our tendency towards self-reliance. Paul received that grace. It allowed him to accept forgiveness, abandon his need to justify himself, and, ironically, use his very weakness, his past, as a persecutor, as a platform for proclaiming God's power. It demonstrates that resurrection power flows most strongly, not through those who think they are strong, but through those who know they are weak and rely entirely on God's grace. That ensures the glory goes to God, not us.
Okay, let's try and pull all these threads together now. This is the synthesis part. We've gone from Wright's deep dive into 1 Corinthians 15, the structure of the theology, to his critique of wider worldviews like progressivism and dualism, and then landed with Keller on the historical certainty, the unique nature of the evidence, and the present power and pattern it provides through grace. So when we bring Wright and Keller together on this, what's the single, absolutely crucial, unified message that emerges?
I think the core message is that this one event, the bodily resurrection of Jesus, functions indivisibly across three critical dimensions. You can't separate them. First, as we've stressed, it's the historical foundation. Updike's vast rock of materiality. It's not myth, it's not symbol, it's history. An actual event where God intervened in space and time, defying naturalistic assumptions. That's the non-negotiable starting point.
Okay, historical foundation.
Second, it has cosmic consequence. This historical event isn't just a past curiosity, it's the guarantee of cosmic hope. It's the definitive proof that death, the final enemy, will be defeated for everyone united to Christ. And it guarantees the ultimate renewal of the entire creation, the new heavens and new earth.
And these cosmic consequences directly address those flawed worldviews Wright critiqued.
Directly. It demolishes mere evolutionary optimism because it shows that human effort alone can't fix radical evil or overcome the universe's slide towards decay. Redemption requires God's specific, powerful act of new creation initiated at Easter. And, crucially, it demolishes ontological dualism. By raising Jesus bodily, God affirms the goodness of the physical. The ultimate hope isn't escaping creation, but its perfection and renewal, that New Jerusalem coming down, the final marriage of heaven and earth. It validates our embodied existence.
Right, so historical foundation, cosmic consequence. What's the third leg of the stool?
The third is present power and pattern. The resurrection isn't just history, and it's not just future hope. It transforms the now. It's the source of real available power through the Holy Spirit, that first installment of the age to come. And it provides the fundamental pattern for living now, the Great Reversal, achieving life through death, strength through weakness, impact through service.
So the synthesis really demands a unified life, doesn't it? Where our understanding of history, our hope for the future, and our actions in the present are all shaped by this one event,
Exactly. It calls us to live in the power of the future right now. Our daily choices, our ethics, our priorities should reflect the profound certainty that death is defeated and creation will be renewed.
Okay, this is where it gets really practical and maybe challenging for us listening. Let's try and offer some specific prompts, some takeaways for you, the listener, to connect all this deep knowledge to your own lived experience.
Good idea. Let's start with that contrast between vague wishful hope and historical elpida, that profound certainty. Ask yourself, how does knowing that the foundation of your faith isn't just a nice idea, but a verified historical event, a rock? How does that actually change your approach to everyday stuff? Anxiety about the future, dealing with disappointment or failure at work, facing illness, or even just those nagging existential fears about meaning and mortality. If the absolute worst thing, death itself, has been overcome in principle by Christ, how does that recalibrate your response to lesser fears and challenges?
It's a powerful question. Okay, second prompt. Thinking about the goal. If the ultimate biblical vision isn't escaping earth, but the renewal of creation and the New Jerusalem coming down over the well, what does that mean for our life in the world now? How should that certainty reshape your practical priorities? If you're, say, teacher, how does it affect how you view your students and your work? If you're involved in business or art or community organizing or science, how does the knowledge that the physical realm matters eternally change your ethics, your goals, your commitment to justice, beauty, and order right here, right now?
Yeah, it shifts the focus from just getting souls saved to participating in God's restorative work in all areas of life, doesn't it? And a third prompt, reflecting on Paul and that theme of grace we discussed with Keller. Paul, the least of the apostles, the former persecutor, became the hardest worker precisely because he knew it was all grace. So reflect on this. How does truly grasping that God loves you, accepts you fully, completely, in spite of your flaws, your past mistakes, your ongoing struggles, how does that deep assurance free you up? How does it enable you to serve others more fearlessly, maybe take risks, step into areas where you feel inadequate precisely because your status isn't based on your performance, but is totally secured by God's grace shown in Christ? That security is meant to be the fuel for tireless, fearless service.
Certainty leading to fearless action because your worth isn't on the line. That's profound. Okay, building on that idea of certainty in action, let's leave you, our listener, with one final provocative thought, something to mull over, maybe explore further on your own. We know this resurrection certainty radically changed how the early church faced danger and death. Think about Martin Luther during the terrifying bubonic plague outbreak in Wittenberg in 1527. His response was calm, realistic, and deeply principled.
Right. He didn't advocate reckless exposure, but he strongly advised against pastors, doctors, and city officials abandoning their posts out of fear.
Exactly. He argued that while private citizens without specific duties might flee for safety, those whose vocations required them to stay and serve their neighbors, providing spiritual care, medical help, maintaining order, had a duty to remain, trusting God even while taking sensible precautions. Their lack of fear of death, grounded in the resurrection, enabled them to fulfill their duty of love. So the final thought is this. How does that historical model where resurrection certainty intersects with loving responsibility and vocational duty, even in the face of widespread fear or communal danger, how might that reshape your personal ethical framework today when facing crises, whether personal, local, or global?
That's a challenging question for our times. Food for thought, indeed. Ultimately, this deep dive reveals the resurrection isn't just an interesting piece of ancient history or theology. It's presented by Wright and Keller as the living engine of present power, the unshakable guarantee of future cosmic renewal, and the absolute center of Christian faith and life.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's given you a much richer understanding of the historical bedrock, the cosmic hope, and the present power flowing from the risen Christ. We'll see you next time.